Welcome to I Can't Believe It's Not News with Beth and Elizabeth.
Hi, and welcome to I Can't Believe It's Not News, your favorite podcast about fake news. Here on the show, we rate and review articles, talk about the latest and greatest in fake news, and bring on guests who like to do the same. I am Elizabeth.
And I'm Beth. And today we are talking with Christian Picciolini from the Life After Hate organization. And we just had an amazing talk with Christian. He's a former white nationalist who now helps people basically transition out of a hate group back into normal life. And his organization is like the only one in the Western Hemisphere doing this. So really important. And he was gracious enough to talk with us about propaganda. And so I think let's just get into it. So we are here today with Christian Picciolini. He wrote an awesome book called Romantic Violence, Memoirs of an American Skinhead. And I don't know why he said yes, but he did. And he's here with us on the line. So,
hi, Christian. Welcome to the show.
Hi, everybody.
We are really excited to talk to you. I have been looking and wanting to really talk to somebody about propaganda. And when I saw your book and I saw what you've done and about your organization, which I'll let you tell us a little bit about here, I thought you'd be a great person to talk to. So tell us about yourself and your organization and who you are.
Sure. I'm happy to do that. So I am a co-founder of Life After Hate, which is an organization that essentially helps people disengage from white supremacist movements or ideologies. And we're able to do that because everybody at Life After Hate is actually a former extremist, myself included. From 1987 to 1995, I was involved in America's first neo-Nazi skinhead group in the United States. And I spent 8 years of my life from the time I was 14 until I was 22, from 87 to 95 as part of that group. And I've dedicated the last 20 years of my life to really trying to dismantle what it is that I helped build.
Wow.
Yeah. So one of the things we wanted to really talk to you about is the propaganda that you put out when you were part of that movement. So, in thinking about fake news, we consider propaganda to be kind of a part of the fake news realm. And we define it as information that's used to incite. And tell us from your experience, what do you think propaganda is? How would you define that?
It's kind of become this nebulous term these days because it does incorporate elements of, fake news and conspiracy theory and, misinformation. Propaganda to me is exactly, I think, what you said. It's information, whether true or false, that's given to people to try and get them to become loyal to a certain cause or to, maybe feed their fears to make a loyalty to, some sort of an ideology or a cause.
So do you think that propaganda falls into a fake news category?
It really depends. I mean, I think that, there are different types of propaganda. There is absolutely fake news in propaganda. So if we're talking about, like the Breitbarts of the world or even, some of the more, ugly sites like the Daily Stormer, which is, was a really popular site for white nationalists, they're putting out fake news. Oftentimes they're completely making up stories or twisting facts to fit a certain narrative. And there's a lot of that, unfortunately, on the internet these days. There's so much information on the internet. It's hard to distinguish what's real and what's new, what's fake news or what's propaganda or disinformation or even parody. But as far as kind of true propaganda, that could be just avoiding talking about certain things within an ideology, but still putting out a message to boost the fears of people. We hear fear rhetoric. I mean, fear rhetoric is propaganda. It's information that's being given out to, make one side loyal to a certain cause or to make people loyal to a certain cause. So I think that there are different levels. We see propaganda on television all the time. Every commercial we see is propaganda.
Right.
But not every commercial is fake. But we're living in a time where I think fake news has kind of overtaken and eclipsed the idea of what propaganda is, because it's really dominated the landscape.
So one of the things that we've talked about early on in the show is the definition of fake news, because it's kind of hard to get it pinned down. It means different things to different people. When we first started, Beth and I were talking about it, and we even found that just between us, we kind of had some different ideas of what fake news meant exactly. Like, to some people, it is literally, this is a lie that was created out of whole cloth and put out there. But I think that it can also have a little bit more nuance where, it might be part truths, or it might be information that is presented in a certain way, like you said, to invoke a fear response or, incite people to do something. I think that propaganda would fall into that heading in that way.
Yeah, I think even the omission of facts in a message could be, it could be propaganda.
What's an example of that? That's an interesting thought.
So, all right, let's look at what we're calling the alt-right today. The alt-right in large part claims that they're a pro-white organization, that they're only concerned about preserving European heritage and the plight and the genocide of the white male that they think is happening, and that's propaganda, right? It's giving out this message to try and rally people behind their cause. What they're omitting is they're not necessarily lying about the fact that they are pro-white, but what they are omitting is the fact that they're anti-everything else. So that, to me, is propaganda. The fact that, in front of cameras, it seems like this, to some people, a benign cause where they're just proud of their heritage, when in fact, behind closed doors, I know that, the talk doesn't exist there like it does in the public. It's different. It's about eliminating the enemy. It's about marginalizing people further, about blaming specific groups unjustly for what's happening. And those are kind of the two faces of propaganda. There's outward-facing marketing, and then there's internal propaganda. The internal propaganda is much more devious, much more inflammatory than the stuff that they put out to the rest of the world.
So an ironic word to describe it would be whitewashing propaganda.
Beth.
That's what it's called, though. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, you're right.
I'm curious because, obviously the events in Charlottesville just happened a couple, what has it been now, a week and a half ago?
I don't know. In Trump adjusted time, I don't know. It feels like dog years.
So 12 years ago, Charlottesville happened. I was thinking about it with the All Lives Matter quote. And it kind of made me think about it in a way of do the people that say all lives matter realize that they're supporting white supremacists?
That's a really great point, actually.
When they say that, because it is, like you said, it's omitting that, Black Lives Matter. It's not the counterpoint to Black Lives Matter.
And it's hard to argue that all lives matter. Of course, all lives matter. We know this. This is the
right.
thing that's pretty
That's not the point, though.
Right. That's not the point, and that is not the fight that needs a voice right now. And that is a really great point, actually, on how propaganda can be twisted to seem very, very benign and very positive in some cases,
right?
To really have a more nefarious meaning. When they're saying all lives matter, what they're really saying is, Black lives don't matter as much as my life, because they're marginalizing a group that is trying to get justice. And they're doing that out of fear of losing their own, identity.
I think it's a lot of fear. It's, obviously I'm a white person, so I guess I can speak as a white person on this, is that I think there's fear out there that when they hear things like Black Lives Matter, that it's like, oh, something's going to be taken away from me, or that's going to make me less somehow. And so I have to respond by saying, no, I still matter. And it's like, that's not the point.
It's the same fear, the same mindset that they had during the civil rights movement, during Reconstruction, Jim Crow, everything. It's a us versus them mindset. And it's like, it's to me anyway, it seems like the movement against the ability for homosexuals to get married, like their marriage is somehow going to take away something from my marriage.
Right.
Well, I think it's a fear from deviating from a comfort zone. I say that hatred is born of ignorance, fear is its father, and isolation is its mother. You take what we're afraid of, and if we don't know it, if we don't understand it because we're so isolated from it, that turns into hatred. It turns into, the marginalization of whatever it is that you don't understand. And I think, we have a lot of that in our country right now. We have a lot of fear. There's not a clear direction or a clear, national identity because we're so polarized. Frankly, we're a little bit lost right now, and fear, that's the perfect place for fear to grow, is, an uncertainty. I think people are deflecting what they're really afraid of. Of course, we all, we want jobs and security, and, in our rural communities, factories are moving out, but are they really moving out because, African Americans in Chicago are, making those jobs come to Chicago? No, it's because of, corporations moving these jobs out of the country for profit, or it's because of progress, or it's because of all these things. And yet, here we are, in rural America blaming, people of color in the urban cities when, frankly, nothing I do here in Chicago affects anybody that, lives in Kansas. I really feel like the propaganda has served to use us all as pawns against each other, and we're falling for it. And, we're losing sight of what this country, is supposed to be about. And that's, I don't want to make any kind of illusion that, we're perfect, that, we've been living the American dream. Frankly, it's been fractured and we've made progress, but, we're still not living up to our American ideals, nor I think we maybe never have.
Sure. When you were actively creating propaganda for this movement, did you in your heart know it wasn't true? Did you feel like you were manipulating facts, or did you really believe it?
I really believed it. At first I didn't understand it, and I thought I was stupid that I didn't know this. So when I would read things, or when somebody would say something within our circles, I tended to go along with it because I didn't want to seem like the person who didn't have that knowledge. And because I felt like I didn't have that knowledge, I tried to absorb as much of it as possible to try and fit in, especially at a younger age. I was hearing, older people talking about all these concepts like National Socialism, and I didn't understand. It wasn't, part of my DNA. I wasn't raised that way or taught that. And when I didn't get it, I worked extra hard to get it. So then I would, almost be force feeding myself to believe it. So when my propaganda was music. That was my weapon of choice. In the 80s and 90s, especially in the white supremacist movement, music was the number one recruitment tool. It was the number one propaganda tool, and it was the glue essentially that kept the movement together in the 80s and 90s, at least in the United States, and I would even be confident saying that about Europe. Music is powerful. Music is something that is universally enjoyed. It brings you back to old memories. It can invoke emotions in you. It's a social instrument that brings groups of people together. And we recognized very early on in the late 80s that music could be used as a weapon. And in fact, we would joke around that we were musical terrorists, and the lyrics that we wrote were about promoting this ideology, about distorting facts, although we didn't really think that we were distorting them. It was about instilling kind of like this false sense of pride in people to make them feel like they were heroes, and it was effective, unfortunately, and it went along with a really kind of driving beat that in itself already, caused people to become a little bit more aggressive. So it was kind of a recipe for disaster, but it was a very effective tool.
It's funny sometimes when you like a song and then you start hearing and understanding the lyrics, and then you start figuring out that, wait a second, it makes me think of like Paul Ryan jamming to Rage Against the Machine.
Oh my gosh.
When he was running for vice president and they were like, stop saying you love us. We fucking hate you. You're a turd and we hate you and you don't understand our lyrics.
Oh, he doesn't care. He doesn't care. He would be listening to white supremacist heavy metal if it had a good beat, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly.
But here's the thing is people will sing songs or sing, lyrics that we will make fit to ourselves no matter what, even if it is completely, perfect example, like you just said, Rage Against the Machine and Paul Ryan. I'm guessing they don't share a lot of common values as far as their outlook on the world. And the same with the white power music that we made. I mean, when we would sing it to people, we weren't necessarily saying, gas the Jews. We were saying, stand up for, what you believe in. And if you don't, people are going to take that away from you. So it was a marketing tactic too.
So definitely more of that outward facing rhetoric that you were talking about. And then, so that's the really nasty stuff isn't in the marketing materials. It's in the back rooms.
It would depend. And that's a really good distinction is, obviously to outward facing people, if we were trying to recruit, we tried to seem, as normal as possible with a message that was as palatable as possible. But, behind closed doors at skinhead concerts, with a bunch of, drunken, broken people, the truth would come out, and you, of course, the language would change, and of course, the violent message would ramp up. So, I mean, we got to be very good at identifying the audiences and figuring out when to do what. And, frankly, that was our job. Propagandist's job is to convince people, even if they don't believe it, even if it's something that is completely outside of their, normal reality. It is their job to convince them to believe it by, pulling emotional levers.
So you talk about broken people. What do you think really drives people towards that movement and helps them fit in, or someone that you would identify as someone who would be a good recruit?
It's really easy, actually. Every single person on earth at some point in their life, or maybe, for many years of their lives, look for three very fundamental human things, and that's identity, community, and purpose. Especially young people, that when they're out looking for that, if there's some sort of a pothole that exists in their lives, and I describe a pothole as being something that deviated their path from their original intended path, and that could be something like trauma or abuse or mental illness or a perceived grievance or lack of education or lack of opportunity, whatever the case may be. If those things exist, eventually, if we're desperate enough, we'll look for acceptance, in the places that are willing to give it to us. If nobody else is willing to accept us or to, or continues to marginalize us, eventually we have no place to go but to some of these really dark corners. And in those dark corners are people that are waiting very, impatiently to scoop up everybody who's vulnerable, who's looking for answers and hasn't been able to find them. Because what they do is they provide you with answers. They give you, the solutions to your problems, although they're not the right solutions. They say, those things that you're experiencing, poverty or the fact that you can't find a job, well, that's somebody else's fault. It's these people here that are causing it for you. And it's always an us against them, blame the other narrative. It's never about accepting responsibility. And this is true for ISIS. This is true for, the far right. This is true for gangs in the inner city. It's all about promising paradise to the people who are desperately searching for it and providing them with a very black and white, very easy solution to a very complex problem, which of course is not ever the right approach.
That makes me think of all of the schools that are losing funding for like arts programs and sports programs and how imperative those are for kids as they're growing up to have something, to be involved in drama or the school band. Like if you had been involved in a school band and been able to, use your musical talents there, maybe you would have had a different purpose.
Yeah, I was I love to draw. I love to play baseball. Had a Gary Carter from the 1983 Mets, walked up to me in an alley in 1987 and offered me, some friendship and some guidance instead of America's first neo-Nazi skinhead who pulled, a joint out of my mouth and told me to hate the Jews and that they were the ones making me do that. I probably would have gone with Gary Carter, the catcher, because that's that's what I wanted to do. But nobody ever really gave me those opportunities. And, unfortunately, young people these days are facing that same kind of lack of opportunity.
Yeah, it's sometimes it's hard to explain sometimes to people who don't believe in funding from the beginning. But like those programs, they do make a difference and they can really help so many kids, go on the right track or go on a good track in life instead of, smoking a joint in an alley and getting Clark meltdown.
Yeah, well,
which probably didn't happen to a lot of people. You
get the kind of society that you want to support. So if you don't want to pay for these programs, if you don't want to invest in kids' education, this is what you're going to get.
I think one thing is you really can't run a society or a country like you do a business. You can't cut corners everywhere and, get it down to the bare bones to run it. You have to invest in it. And I think that's our point is that that investment, I think, gets overlooked sometimes.
I love that. I mean, you really can't run it like a business because business is about profit. It's not about, necessarily the feelings or the security or, or justice. It's about winning. It's not about compromise. And, we live in a really complex country with, a million moving parts with, people representing every walk of life. And there is no black and white solution like there is in business. And, I think we're in a place where I want to go back to your other comment where, you said that, we're taking away arts programs and things like that. What we're doing is creating a generation that's going to be devoid of that color, of that flavor, who, maybe 50 or 70 or 100 years from now will feel discomfort when those types of different things are introduced. And we may go back to this really kind of nativist society where, we're comfortable with the status quo and anything else like art or music or performance art is seen as like really taboo and bad, and that's not where we want to go.
Yeah, that's an interesting point too. Dang, let's not do that. Before we go on, I want to talk to you. I want to ask you a difference in definition. So, can you tell us the difference between what is a neo-Nazi versus a white supremacist?
Sure. Well, I think white supremacist is the umbrella term, right? That's the movement. It is a white supremacist movement, and under that umbrella, you've got different factions that may look different, may sound different, but ultimately are still all aligned with that same white supremacist ideology. Some are more political, like neo-Nazis or National Socialists, and even like the alt-right. And some are more, traditional in the sense of what we would consider, a racist, and that's, a skinhead or a Klansman or something like that. So think of it kind of like Major League Baseball, right? You've got different teams. They're all competing against each other. They're all wearing different uniforms, and they're all managed by different managers. But at the end of the day, they're all playing ball. They're all playing the same baseball game. And, you still have to hit the most home runs to win. You still have to steal bases, and they're all doing the same thing. So, in my opinion, when I hear terms like the alt-right or white nationalists or ethno-nationalists or American, it's like they're always changing it to metastasize the cancer so that they can't be cured. And, this is a strategy by the people at the very top who, frankly, have an agenda and are using the people in this movement, to their own benefit. Let's not differentiate between, what an alt-right or a neo-Nazi or a white nationalist is. There are nuances, but there really isn't that much difference.
Sure.
I don't want to get hung up on that.
So it's funny because Elizabeth and I were talking about it, and you'd mentioned in your book that you mentioned a couple times about putting the white laces in your Doc Martens. And I during this time frame that you were talking about, I was in Iowa, so not too far from where you were at. And I remember having a fear of skinheads. Like, I was scared that I was going to meet a skinhead, somewhere, and bad things would happen, right? And Elizabeth and I were talking about it, and she actually wore Doc Martens during that time frame and had colored shoelaces in them.
Which color?
Well, that was the thing. That was the question that Beth and I were talking about. So I was in like the Southeast Texas area during that time. And so we had like real KKK and things like that out there.
We just had corn and pigs in Iowa.
There were skinheads there too.
I didn't know about the colored shoelace thing. So when Elizabeth was like, she like honed in on it, I was like, oh, that's why he kept mentioning that. Okay, so go on, Elizabeth.
Yeah, so when I was in school, I was in like the goth crowd, and we hung out with the punk crowd. And I had my Doc Martens and they had their Doc Martens, and I learned all about the shoelaces from them. So we didn't hang out with skinhead types, but they were the straight edge, non-racist people. And I had purple laces from my Doc Martens because I thought it was a really pretty shade of purple. And I remembered them saying, oh, you shouldn't be wearing those because of something. And I can't remember what the reason was. And so Beth Googled it, and she said that purple laces meant gay pride. And I don't think that would have been a thing. I would have been like, sign me up for more purple laces. That's awesome.
There are a lot of legends about like what the colors mean. And I think that, each group probably, had their own meaning for stuff. If you had purple laces in your Doc Martens, I don't know that would have been an issue for, either a racist skinhead or an anti-racist punk rocker. I don't ever recall seeing anybody wearing purple laces. And as long as they weren't straight laced, which would definitely signify that you were at least a skinhead, maybe not a racist skinhead, but some sort of a skinhead, would have been more of a draw. But most people wore white. Some people wore red. I wore red, but I also wore white. Red kind of signified that, you were violent, that you were a leader. You had to earn your red laces. There were some people who wore yellow, like in England, that signified that they were, very anti law enforcement. People just kind of came up with their own systems.
I actually found an article that says the color of your shoelaces might tell someone you're a neo-Nazi. And it says that white was for white pride. Blue means that you killed a cop. Red was the neo-Nazi or the National Front. Yellow, they actually have as anti-racist. And then purple was the gay pride. And then black is no affiliation.
Black is, these came with my Doc Martens.
These came with the Doc Martens. Yeah.
I'm guessing a non-skinhead wrote that article, but I'm just guessing.
But it was interesting. It was one of those things in the book that I hadn't thought to question why you were talking about it until Elizabeth had mentioned that, and it kind of clicked in my head. I was like, oh, he mentions that a couple times in the book. So it was just kind of a funny aside that I now feel enlightened about colored shoestrings.
And who said that this wasn't an informative podcast?
We hope.
What was I doing wearing Doc Martens in Texas? Like, just
what year was it?
It was in the 90s, so it would have been like in the mid 90s, and it is so hot in Texas. And they don't breathe, and it's awful. And it was just, and then we had to wear flannel too because of Nirvana.
Around your waist.
Right? Oh, well, you just have to suffer for your fashion. Had the flannel and the Doc Martens, and I was properly alternative back then, but God, it was so hot.
Well, thank you very much for driving up the price of Doc Martens and making them available in every store, including, Walmart now. When I ordered my Doc Martens for the first several years, I had to order them from England and pay duty fees and things like that because there wasn't a store in the U.S. that sold them. And the next thing you know, I leave the movement and I'm having PTSD because everybody I see is wearing Doc Martens.
Yeah. Definitely.
And now the bomber jackets are in style, and it's freaking me out.
Oh, man.
In your book, you talk a lot about recruiting, and I'm just really curious, like, what you think makes a successful propaganda campaign. So like you talked about, advertising is a form of propaganda. So obviously, there's propaganda it's a scale of what is harmful or, can get you into trouble. But what do you think our listeners should really look for when they're presented with rhetoric so they can know that, this is something that is trying to get me to feel a certain way or to react?
Well, I mean, I think that the easy tip off is if it sounds too good to be true and, it's an answer to a complex problem that is giving you a really simple solution, it's probably bullshit. I would also say that, effective propaganda is kind of micro-targeted to people. It's not just a blanket propaganda, although that happens. I mean, we hear a lot of that in the campaign and the rhetoric that comes out of there. But, effective propaganda is micro-targeted to that specific person's deficit, whatever it is in their life that's missing, that they, either blame for being taken away from them or for having an obstacle in their way to get it, like a good job or, the fact that, maybe they're in chronic poverty. That is the most effective form of propaganda. You have to be able to speak to the fears and the deficits within people and then promise them a solution for that seems tangible, which is why blaming the other, people that we often don't know or have never had a meaningful, interaction with, is easy. Because if we're so disconnected from them, it's easy for somebody in rural America living in a town of 42, where the factory is moved and, they see on the news all these films about, black on white crime, black on black crime, the streets of Chicago are unsafe and all these things that are, that they're being fed through their TV screens and their phones. Well, they're going to assume that that's the reality, and they're going to develop a judgment based on what they feel is the reality. So, propaganda is happening even though we're not intending it for it to have certain circumstances. When we make films about, street gangs and promote that stereotype, I mean, that to some people is the reality. That's their news. They assume that what they see in film or on TV and TV shows is real because they've never come into contact with African Americans or even been to the big city. And that could be a scary concept that people are developing their reality based on, the whims of whatever, people feel like making creatively, whether that be, drama or fake news that's intended to be real.
Well, I think that's a good lead in to ask you, do you ever think there's good propaganda? And we had talked about that in our first episode about the U.S., the war that they waged against Germany with propaganda in the first episode. And, I kind of struggled with like how to explain how propaganda can sometimes be good. And like, do you think there's a time and a place for propaganda?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think propaganda itself is a derogatory term. I mean, I think it really is, just to try and get your point across to people. I think people use it in a negative way, and it's gotten that, the negative rap. When we hear the word propaganda, we think all of a sudden it's bad. Mm-hmm. I think good propaganda is, the viral videos that we see online of people doing really amazing things for each other, or, the heart-touching stories about, a disabled athlete who's brought onto, a basketball court to play and the feeling of joy that gives us. That's propaganda. But it's, what I would consider truth. Those are the things that really happen in life, the things that make us feel a certain way based on, based on truth and a genuine, feeling of humanity. I think good propaganda is what we need. I think we need to see the goodness that's happening instead of talking about all the bad that's happening. Because, let's face it, I think that there's more good happening every day in this world than there is bad. But all we hear about is the bad. And, while it's nice that the news, ends with their fluff piece about some puppy or whatever, I think what we really need to do is focus on more tangible stories about real human beings going above and beyond, what the status quo is to make sure that their community, their family, and the people that they love are safe, happy, and living in some sort of harmony. Good propaganda is powerful. We see it all the time. Sometimes we don't even know it's propaganda. But when somebody shares one of those viral videos of, somebody doing something amazing and breaking all the stereotypes, that to me is good propaganda.
It's almost like we should have the word kind of fall into more of like a Spanish version where you have like propaganda is good and propagando is bad. So you can have propaganda two different ways.
That could work. I don't see that taking off.
You don't?
It was a nice try.
Damn it, Beth. Back to the drawing board.
Fine.
What suggestions do you have for other people, not me, who have racist or very conservative family members or loved ones or people in their life? No, I'm talking about for a friend. So not necessarily neo-Nazis, but people who support some of those same views.
This is going to be the most unpopular answer that your audience has ever heard, but I'm going to give it anyway.
Uh-oh.
And that is to show compassion to the people that least deserve it when they least deserve it.
Oh, I love that answer.
Yeah.
That's propaganda.
Maybe. Good propaganda, but I think
not propaganda.
No, it's the bad kind. It's the bad kind that's trying to stop me from posting nasty Facebook messages.
We can only delete our family members, who are racist, until we run out of family members, but the truth is, listen, we can only affect the people closest to us. People ask me like, how do we solve racism? I'm like, I have no fucking idea, because if I did, I would have won a Nobel Prize by now. But, what I do know is we can affect the people closest to us, our parents, our friends, our coworkers, whoever it is that we care enough, to respect, despite their views, and work to just show them humanity. People change not because of what they hear. They change because of what they see and what they feel. So and I know this because it happens thousands of times. I mean, I've seen it happen hundreds of times, and just with the people that I work with, we all changed because we came in touch with humanity. We were able to humanize the enemy. We were able to get rid of that, that idea or that stereotype in our head that the people that we hated were demons. And instead now, if you start to receive love and compassion and empathy and no judgment, despite how shitty you might be living your life, chances are good at some point, you're going to accept that, and you're not going to be able to justify or reconcile your hate anymore. But I can tell you that nowhere in the history of the United States or the world, or aliens on Mars, has anybody ever changed their political views by getting punched in the face.
I agree 100%.
Or deleted from Facebook.
Yeah, Christian, I could not agree with you more. And in fact, especially with the response to the doxing of the white supremacists that were at the rallies and the people getting fired from their jobs, I couldn't help but think, okay, but what's that going to do?
It's just going to push them further in the hole.
Then you have an unemployed white supremacist who now has to go find a job with somebody who shares his views, because that's going to be the only person that hires him. And he's going to hear that even more. He's going to be more indoctrinated. He has now been wronged by the man. And I think although I understand the reaction of, we don't want this person in our neighborhood, but I don't know how that helps anything. And I think you just hit the nail on the head, that compassion and helping that person is going to do a lot more. I keep thinking of that kid that got fired from the hot dog place, and they had to post on their door that he no longer worked there.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah.
And every, a lot of people cheered that. And I think a lot of people that listen to this podcast probably cheered that. But I can't help but stop and think, what if instead his employer had said, hey, if you want to continue to work here, we would like you to attend some, hate management seminars. I don't know. He could, Christian's the person to talk to about
Stop putting ideas in my
resources. But
that's what they'd say. Go talk to Christian. He's going to go sort you out.
Yeah, but
giving. I can't tell you how many emails I got from people referring those folks to me, and I've actually tried to reach out to some of them.
But if it's almost like if you treat it like you would an alcoholic, it's a disease that can be combated. And there are a lot of people that get fired from their jobs from being alcoholic, but there's some really good companies out there that have stepped up and helped out some people to get them back to where they're able to function in society and keep working and be a great part of society. And I think that's, even though we don't like Nazis.
No, listen, I fucking hate Nazis. I mean, trust me when I say that. I know it because I was one, and I know what they're capable of. But they're also, beyond that facade or even, beyond that DNA that's seeped into them, they're human beings that at some point were broken enough to go into that. Nobody was born that way. Nobody, strives to be a hater. They were marginalized, and that's why they were in that movement. So as human beings, if we marginalize them even further and ostracize them, that's just going to push them deeper in their hole, make them angrier, polarize them further. When I was 18 years old, if somebody would have punched me in the head for my beliefs, I would have come back with either a gun or a bunch of guys that would have, not let that happen again.
Right.
And it wouldn't have changed my mind. I don't think that getting hit with a piss bottle at a protest rally, is going to make any of those khaki wearing
values.
dudes, say, oh, maybe I shouldn't hate black people or Jews right now. No, it's going to make you hate them more because it validates your point, and it shows the public that you actually do have a legitimate concern where you are being marginalized. That's exactly what they want. They want this violence against them because it's the same tactics that they can now justify using against the other side.
I think when you turn it around, if you were a protester that got beat up by a white supremacist, would that make you then change your values and want to be a Nazi? It's like, when you think about it the other way, it's like, well, no, so why would it work the other way?
Exactly.
That's funny.
Nobody told me you guys were this smart. I mean, come on.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Can you say that again?
I retract my statement.
So, Christian, what happened to cause you to see the world differently? Were you hit in the head with a water bottle at a protest? Is that it?
Is that what happened?
No. Unfortunately, I was never hit in the head with a water bottle. Although maybe, I should have been a couple of times. No, I mean, really, it was that repeated, meeting chance, whether it's a chance meeting or, a strategic meeting with people that I'd kept outside of my social circle, people that were different than me, people who were African-American or gay or Jewish, who, repeatedly saw something inside of me that I didn't even see myself and took it upon themselves to try and pull that out. Like I said, I was 14 years old before I was standing in the alley smoking a joint. The day before that, I was probably sitting in a closet drawing, trying to come up with plans for some, mega hotel that I wanted to build. Whoa, maybe I was meant to be Donald Trump. I digress.
Wow, I'm almost thinking you went on the right path.
I digress.
That's odd.
Someday I will tell you how I believe that Nutella is what made me an extremist. But that's for a longer podcast,
okay.
I think.
Okay.
No, I mean, I was this shy, introverted kid who was very idealistic, who, was very talented. I could draw. I was athletic, but nobody ever saw that stuff in me. And I was literally screaming, for people to pay attention, and nobody did. And when somebody finally did, I was willing to accept that. But along the way, for those 8 years that I was involved, I questioned it every day, and I came into contact with people, even if it was a little nudge, changed my trajectory just a little bit. Eventually, to where I couldn't reconcile the feelings that I had, or the stereotypes didn't make any sense, because I began to meet the people in real life that that I was making a judgment about, and I couldn't do it. So, for me, really, the number one catalyst was having, at 19 years old, getting married and having a child. Because when I held my child in my arms for the first time in that delivery room, I reconnected with that innocence that I lost at 14. I went from 14 to 70 years old in overnight, to like some crotchety 70-year-old, Klan guy on his rocking chair, whittling wood and, saying the N-word. That's what I was. And I didn't have a chance to find my true passions or to understand the world, as it happens. Instead, I jumped into the fire. And when I had my child, it made me reconnect with that and feel the loss of that. And suddenly, it challenged my idea of what my identity, who my community was, and what my purpose was. It wasn't being a Nazi leader. It was being a dad and a husband. It wasn't, about a community of violent, drunken, backstabbing people who, lied to the public because they hated themselves so much that they needed to project their own pain on other people. It was about my wife and this new family that I was making. And, my purpose came into question. Did I want to destroy the world, or did I, want to support my family? And I decided that ultimately everything that I'd done for those 8 years had not produced an ounce of good. In fact, it had only destroyed the people that I'd hurt and myself.
Was your wife part of the movement too?
No, she wasn't. She hated it.
Oh, wow.
In fact, it was I had to chase her for a long time before I could get her to go out on a date with me. She was, she probably would have hung out with Beth, I think. She was a little goth girl.
Elizabeth was the goth.
Elizabeth, yeah.
That's Elizabeth.
We're basically the same person anyway.
Yeah, it's hard because we have kind of the same name. It's weird.
So, she was kind of like this, anti-racist punk rock goth girl, and she hated everything that I stood for. But because we were heavily recruiting, we would always bring in these groups of people to parties, and she was, tagging along with somebody, not knowing what she was getting into. And, I immediately fell in love with her, but she wanted nothing to do with me. And I chased her for a long, long time until finally, I think she just got tired of saying no. She said, yes, I'll go on a date with you if you'll just shut the fuck up. And when I was with her, I was different. She didn't see the ugly side of me. She saw the loving, caring side that was underneath all that. So, and I think she also saw something in me that I didn't even see, and she decided she was going to gamble. And we got married. We had 2 beautiful children, and unfortunately, we got divorced because I didn't leave the movement quickly enough for her. And when that happened, I lost everything. I lost my wife and children. I closed my record store where I was selling white power music, where luckily I had the opportunity to meet people from all different races that challenged my narrative. So I had my livelihood was gone. I didn't have a great relationship with my family. I lost my whole community. I lost, everything that I built from, the time I was 14 years old. And it was awful when I walked away. Not because, I had chosen to follow a positive life, but because it was hard to start over with that stigma. Even though I had changed, I tried to outrun it. And when I tried to outrun it, it was killing me from the inside out. And it wasn't until I actually started to tell people a few years after I left the movement that, I started to not want to kill myself when I woke up in the morning, or not, want to numb myself with drugs. It was then that I realized that I was just trying to run from my past, and I couldn't do that anymore. And I needed to confront it. And that was, 18 years ago.
Your book was amazing and really well written. And I think one of my favorite parts of it was in the beginning when you're describing your childhood. It just really transports you there. And, you feel like you can almost smell the
grandma's cooking.
Yeah. Like, imagine the probably velour shirt that you were wearing as a child.
With the big pointy collars.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
true.
Exactly. But really well written, and definitely the ending where you talk about going back to your old high school and seeing that security guard again and kind of putting you in motion to telling your story. I mean, I wasn't crying, but
Sure.
I maybe had some Kleenexes next to me. It was very, very emotional, very powerful. And I think you're doing an amazing thing by sharing your story and helping people understand that there is a human underneath there, and that, there is hope. And, I'd like to hear a little bit about your organization and so our listeners can hear what you guys are doing. I saw that you guys had some funding from Obama, and then this other guy got elected.
Yeah, tell us about that. That sounds so interesting.
So the guy who I really like gave us funding in January of last year, just before he left office. We were awarded $400,000 to expand our programming at a time when the need was skyrocketing and the intake was unmanageable because so many people had been referred to us. And through our stories and media, we were able to reach all these other people who were running from their past or who were stuck in it right now and who wanted to get out. And we were ready to go with a program to launch it, and we were just patiently waiting for the money that was supposed to have come a long time ago. And then in January, we were informed by the new administration that our funding had been rescinded with no explanation. I mean, there wasn't anything saying we weren't qualified. There was nothing saying that the criteria had changed. It just said, we've re-reviewed your application and you won't be getting the funding. It was disconcerting because we are at a time in our country right now where not only are we the only organization in the Western Hemisphere who's helping people disengage from white supremacist movements, we are also at a time when white supremacy and white supremacist violence is at its highest. And it's at a time when we refuse to even call it what it is, and that's terrorism. It's a rare occasion, that an act of white extremist violence is classified as terrorism. Dylan Roof's shooting in South Carolina was not considered terrorism, although the San Bernardino shooting in a community center by, jihadists was. There's no difference between those two. They're both politically motivated. They're both meant to, instill fear and terror in people. If you leave a manifesto talking about those exact things and we fail to call you a terrorist, there's a problem with that. And until, as a country, we can come to grips with the fact that we have more domestic terrorists already within our borders, but they happen to look just like our neighbors, we're not going to get past this. And the resources won't be applied to combat it. Most people don't know this because we never talk about it, but since 9/11, more Americans have been killed on U.S. soil than by white supremacists than by any other terrorist group, foreign or domestic combined, by a factor of 2. That's a problem. They're already here. So all these programs, trying to keep people out of our country and trying to remove people from our country, first of all, that's un-American. And second of all, it's not going to work. They're already here.
Right.
And they're white. And, I'm not, please don't take that as like, white people are bad. I'm not anti-white. I'm not trying to categorize all Trump voters as, racists or as extremists. But the fact remains is we have hundreds of thousands of people who are training for this race war that they see coming, who are very willing to promote this idea and recruit more people towards their effort. And, if there's an estimate that there are 300,000 people who are training in paramilitary camps in the United States under this anti-government pro-white banner. If we had 300 ISIS members training anywhere in the United States, do you think we would hesitate to drop a bomb on them? We did it in Tulsa on a black community in the 1920s. We did it in Philadelphia in the 1980s, against a group of what they considered black extremists. But here we are, just kind of sweeping it under the rug, and we have a serious threat that exists, and it continues to grow.
I read an article that said vending machines kill more people per year than jihadist terrorists. Basically, there's all these things like mattresses, all these things that kill you.
Yeah, those vending machines are evil. You know, when they turn sentient and then they attack you, it's scary. Yeah.
Right. I also
we start an anti-vending movement.
Yeah, we're going to start an organization, Elizabeth and I, to save us from the vending machines.
Yeah, I think it's weird that no one ever talks about it. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. That's probably why they're doing all those services now where you can have snacks mailed to you.
But that would be supporting terrorism, wouldn't it? If you were aiding and abetting terrorists. Snacks,
only if you can also be killed by opening the box, which probably people do get killed by opening a box. It's just, you can literally be killed anyway. But I want to ask you real quick, when you were talking, I'm just curious, if somebody ever called you and asked you to help Steve Bannon, do you think he's a white supremacist, and do you think you could help him?
I've been asked about Donald Trump. Here's the thing. I think everybody has the possibility to find redemption. everybody has the possibility to have some life-changing event that alters their perspective of the world. If that person is sitting in a comfortable leather chair with a full bank account and, media requests coming in by the thousands, it's hard to get them out of that comfort zone. And it's hard to get them to acknowledge that what they're doing is bad because, frankly, they probably don't feel all that bad about it. Would I meet with Steve Bannon? Absolutely, I would meet with Steve Bannon. And do I think he's a racist? Probably. Yeah. I mean, I think beyond racist, I think he's probably a more politically aligned, ethno-nationalist, meaning that, he wants some sort of a homeland with people like him in it and everybody else gone. But I also think he's a master propagandist and a master opportunist. If you were to ask me if Donald Trump is a racist, I would say probably, but I think Donald Trump is a Trump supremacist.
Yes.
I think that if you are Donald Trump or a member of his family, he thinks that they're better than anybody, despite your color, race, religion, class, whatever. So I think that what drives him is narcissism.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, I just have to ask for one of our friends, especially who is a massive, massive Samantha Bee fan. What was it like to be in the same room as her? Were you just overcome by how amazing she is?
We should
it's
preface
amazing.
that. Christian did an interview with Samantha Bee.
Yeah.
Okay, and I nearly lost my mind because we had already asked you if you'd be on this podcast. You'd already said yes. And then I saw you on Samantha Bee and I about lost my shit.
And Beth isn't even the person who I'm talking about. I'm talking about our coworker who's always sending me Samantha Bee videos and talking about how much he loves her.
Yeah. I love Sam Bee. She's amazing. It's funny. We're living in a time now where, nighttime comedians are the real news of the day. They're the most influential and the most honest and the most genuine and the least afraid to tell the truth. I have to, and I even told this to Sam when I saw her.
You call her Sam.
Oh yeah. You call her Sam.
Yeah. We're on a half first name basis now. She calls me C. I call her Sam. No. First of all, she's amazing. She's super, super nice, very down to earth, and awesome. But second, I also told her that really the first time I saw anybody speak about the alt-right or talk about these issues that we were facing with white supremacy in America, at least during this last election cycle, was her on her show. I remember, we tape her show. I've been taping her show for years, and my wife and I watch it. And when she did the episode on the alt-right, I literally almost cried because it was everything that I have been saying for years and nobody paid attention to. And she was really the first public personality to call it out for what it was. And, we're living in an era where it's fucking strange right now where, news is being called fake. Comedy is being called news where, up is down, left is right, and it just doesn't make any sense anymore. And it's just so refreshing to have honest, genuine voices. And she's done an amazing thing for Life After Hate. She's offered to help us launch this crowdfunding campaign.
Yeah, I saw that.
And the episode hasn't even aired yet. It's going to air September 13th. So I hope you get this out before then.
We saw it was on Facebook. There was a snippet.
Yeah, so she put out after Charlottesville happened, she wanted to address the issue, and she put out kind of a teaser for the whole episode, which they normally don't do. And, there is a full episode that is going to be airing September 13th where I actually go with an individual that I'm helping through Life After Hate. We go and do you kind of see what an intervention is like to a certain degree. And I sat with her and we had a lot of fun. But she's a really kind and generous person. She really believes in this and she wants to do something. And even before the episode is aired, we've already raised $300,000 of our $400,000 goal just in a matter of less than 2 weeks.
That is so awesome. Yeah. I cannot wait to see that full episode. I didn't know there was more, and now I'm really excited.
Oh, there's a lot more. Just wait. There's a lot more.
Wow.
You haven't seen nothing yet.
Wow. Oh, that's awesome. So glad we got that plug in.
Yeah. So
definitely. Yeah, she's amazing, and it's a shame you'll never meet her.
Thanks for coming on, Christian.
Did I just lose Christian? Did I just lose his feed? I think so.
We will tweet this episode at her, and she will ignore it like normal.
Yeah.
Okay, we have one last question for you. Our tagline, we always say spread jam, not lies. So we like to ask people, what's your favorite jam?
Nutella. And it's not a jam, but it supersedes all jam.
It's a jam because I say it's a jam, damn it.
You can spread it. It goes on bread. It tastes better with a spoon, just a spoon. I mean, what can go wrong?
We make our s'mores with Nutella instead of taking that stupid chocolate bar that never melts.
I love you. I love you. I was telling somebody earlier today, and I pretty much just, if I'm not talking about extremism, I'm talking about Nutella. So this is right like in my wheelhouse.
Oh my God, episode name.
And I was talking to somebody today about how if somebody came out with either a bourbon flavored Nutella or a Nutella flavored bourbon, it would immediately spell death for me. You would find me, dead on the floor with, a spoon and a ring around my mouth that,
That's awesome.
Nutella actually made me an extremist. And let me tell you why. I'll just tell you really quickly. Okay. When I was a kid, this Italian kid going to this very, suburban, not diverse school, not only did they pick on me for my name because they couldn't pronounce it and it sounded like a bunch of really awful things like pick my weenie and, Piccadilly and all kinds of things. But also my parents didn't speak great English, and my lunches were Nutella sandwiches. And they made and this was before Nutella was like the jam, to use your word. They made fun of me relentlessly. Like I couldn't catch a break with it, but I loved it so much. Like my mom, that's what I wanted for lunch. I didn't want, peanut butter and jelly. I didn't want a turkey sandwich or a ham sandwich. I wanted a Nutella sandwich. And that was my only comfort. And I got picked on relentlessly for that. And I'm pretty sure that's what put me over the edge and made me really, want to hurt other people.
When you make a Nutella sandwich, do you put anything else on the other side, or is it just straight Nutella, both sides of the bread? How dare you?
I am a purist. For me, the best Nutella is just with a spoon straight out of the jar. But if I have to use bread, it has to be slightly toasted Italian bread.
Oh, okay.
White bread is okay if it's not toasted with a little bit of Nutella, but you have to put extra Nutella on there to fill all the nooks and crannies.
So are you going to be trying the Nutella s'more now?
I'll put Nutella on just about everything. Have
you not tried the Nutella s'more? Is that?
No, I haven't.
Oh my God, Christian!
Sorry.
Where do you live?
Stop right now.
I live in Chicago.
Where you can light a fire.
I live in Chicago. There's not a whole lot of warm weather where we can actually go out and build fires. So I am secluded to my dungeon with my Nutella. You take the graham
cracker, you spread the Nutella on it, you put the roasted marshmallow in the middle of two Nutella-soaked graham crackers. It's delicious. It's yummy. The reason I was asking is because my daughter loves peanut butter and Nutella sandwiches, and I think it's a little odd.
That's too much. That's wrong.
But I could do that because that's just like a Reese's peanut butter cup.
Oh, damn you. now it does
Don't deny your daughter of her happiness, please.
That makes sense. The man makes sense.
That makes sense. Yeah. Shoot. Okay. Yes. All right. Well, Christian, we better let you go. But thank you so much. We had a great time talking with you, and thank you for coming on. And if you ever do meet Sam Bee again, please send her our big hugs.
I will absolutely.
We'll never meet her.
I will absolutely not do that. But thank you anyway for asking. But no, you guys are awesome. I really appreciate what you're doing. Keep talking about the fake news like you mean it, because it exists, and don't let it get watered down like the guy at the top is doing right now, because it absolutely exists. I can tell you that.
Absolutely. Thanks, Christian.
Thank you so much, Christian. Thank you.
See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.
That was so great, Beth. I really enjoyed having Christian on.
Me too. He's like my favorite person in the world.
Yeah, I really learned a lot. And I think, like, personally, I feel like I have a little bit of a new perspective about how to handle how to think about these people.
I'm also a little nervous about my kids eating so much Nutella.
Yeah.
I don't want them to.
You should. I think there's definitely a causal relationship there.
I mean, if there's a link there, that's kind of scary. No, be sure to check out Christian's organization, lifeafterhate.org, I believe is what it is, where you can donate. And I posted a link on our Facebook with the Sam Bee trailer, that has the link to where you can go to donate. And like he said, they're right around the 300,000 mark right now. So maybe we can get them up to that 400,000.
Yeah, let's help him make up some of that money that the Trump administration took away from him. It's just amazing that the people are doing that, and this episode hasn't even aired.
I know. We're going to be back on our regular schedule for our next episode. And until then, you can follow us on Twitter at Podcast Fake News. You can follow us on Facebook. You can follow us on YouTube.
That's right. And iHeartRadio. And you can support the podcast on Patreon.
Yeah. And you can email us anything that you'd like at podcastfakenews@gmail.com. So until next time,
spread jam,
not lies.